Our ambitions for this game were quite high. We basically struggled a bit. There is no right way to play this game. This is just something I think is maybe unique to Alan Wake. You can't trust his surroundings. What are the rules that govern the Dark Place? We're working on Control 2 right now. We will be using Alan Wake 2 to do some stuff related to that game as well. Where am I? My name is Kyle Rowley. I'm the game director for Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 is a survival horror game. It's the sequel to Alan Wake, which came out in 2010. It is focused around an FBI agent who comes to the Pacific Northwest to investigate ritualistic serial killings. As she's investigating, the kind of story spirals into a nightmare. On the other flip side of that, the playable character, Alan Wake, obviously the titular character, he is trapped in a place called the Dark Place, a nightmare version of New York, and you're trying to help him escape. We have been trying to make this game for a long time. It's been a passion project at the studio. Sam, in particular, has been trying to get this game off the ground for such a long time. But when I joined the project, we were kind of super early on in concepting phases, and after just doing Control, helped us in terms of a bit of like reputation inside the industry, delivering a Game of the Year quality game. And then taking that momentum and moving into the concept for Alan Wake 2, I think that really helped us. We also got the publishing rights back from Microsoft for the first game, which meant that we were in the position to do the remastered version of that. So we had that as well, which allowed us to get people on PlayStation 5 in playing the game if they've never played it, and then updating the game in general for a new audience.
This story will eat us alive. This story is a monster.
I'm also, I think, very interested to see how players respond to the opening of our game, because it's actually quite a bit of a slow burn, I would say, in terms of like we've tried to focus on building atmosphere and the anticipation of something could happen. We really wanted to kind of create that emotional state on the player, but it does mean that, you know, we spend a little bit of time at the start of the game building all of that up. It's not like the game starts where you're shooting people straight away. We don't like have a tutorial where Saga is learning how to be an FBI agent in the shooting range or anything like that. The game starts and you're investigating a serial killer. So you know, it's investigating, talking to people, building that sense of atmosphere. Yeah, looking forward to see how players react to the opening of the game for sure. When we decided to switch the game to be a survival horror game, I think horror was, as a genre, really taking off again, both in terms of games with the Resident Evil 2 remake that was released around that time. And then outside of games, there was modern horror movies, especially stuff that's being released by A24, like Ari Aster with Midsummer and Hereditary, and then, you know, The Witch and Lighthouse. The horror was kind of being a bit more mainstream, so the stars aligned with us getting the rights back and wanting to create a horror game, and horror being something that was being kickstarted. I think that just allowed us to kind of push the concept in a direction that meant that it was appealing to people. When we were talking about what we should do for the sequel, one of the things that we talked about a lot was what did we think went well with the first game, what were the things people liked and what were the things that people didn't like, and even internally inside the studio, what did we feel like went well and what didn't go well. And we felt that there was a bit of a dissonance between the story and the atmosphere and the gameplay. It was definitely an action game at its heart, because we just come off of doing Max Payne, so that was kind of like in our DNA, and we were like, okay, well, we know how to do this. So, you know, I think structurally it was kind of built like an action game, but then the story was kind of trying to be a bit more on the horror side, especially with the thriller elements and the kind of spooky atmosphere. And we just felt that those two just weren't in sync, so we really wanted to try and bring them to be in sync for the next game. The Alan Wake franchise as a whole is definitely very much a narrative-driven experience. You know, we're trying to tell a good story, get players invested in the story. We just felt that the slower pace of the survival horror genre, which, you know, people expect, you know, it gives us a lot of room to do world building, to lean into the narrative more. One of the things that we wanted to figure out really quickly was like, what type of horror? Oh, because, you know, horror is such a broad genre. Silent Hill is very different to Resident Evil in terms of the type of horror that it is. We wanted to kind of figure out what kind of horror were we making, and for us it came down to being a psychological horror with supernatural elements. Even though we do have a wound system in the game, so like we have a bit of gore, I would say, but it's not like, that's not the pillar. Like the pillar for us was always supernatural psychological horror. And then once we kind of understood what kind of horror we were making, it was a case of us looking at our story, our gameplay, our game mechanics, and then trying to figure out how can we represent that in the game. The Dark Place is a good example where we're kind of trying to showcase that Wake's been trapped in this nightmare reality for 13 years and he's kind of losing his marbles a little bit. We kind of wanted to figure out how we could showcase that in the combat, that sense of paranoia he has, that he can't trust his surroundings and the world. So we tried to showcase that in the world with subliminal messaging and the fact that things can just change around him without him even noticing. The this is just something I think is maybe unique to Alan Wake IP, but we really wanted to make sure that we weren't just wall-to-wall horror. The game is quite long, it's over 20 hours, and over 20 hours of like wall-to-wall horror is going to be quite intense. And so we wanted to basically make sure the players had some levity, some web downtime from the horror. So, we have daytime scenes where you can talk to these quirky characters. We have a bit of comedy in there as well to kind of lighten the mood. I think horror and comedy can work pretty well together if you kind of tonally can get it to work right. And then we have the two playable characters, so if you're playing as one character and you're like, oh, this stuff is a bit scary, I'm going to go switch to the other character. Rather than jumping out of the game and playing, like, I don't know, some cozy game, Animal Crossing or something, you can stay playing our game, but, we just play as a different character. One of the other things that we kind of wanted to try and improve in the game was just the feeling that combat was getting a bit repetitive. We wanted to tackle that in a couple of ways. One is by expanding the amount of stuff the player's doing in the game, so more puzzles, more exploration, more mechanics related to the narrative. You make the game slightly wider, but that allowed us to reduce the amount of combat the players were having in the experience and making those combat encounters feel more memorable and more meaningful when you did get them. Making enemies like stay on screen for a longer period of time, making them more physical, making them harder to kill.
It's the same type of page we found at Cauldron Lake.
The two playable characters, they're relatively early on in the concept, actually. We had a teaser video that we did in Quantum Break, an FBI agent working on the case of Alan Wake going missing. That kind of idea stuck. The first game came out 10 years ago. So we really wanted to give players who'd never played the first game, or even if you had played the first game, we would give you a new playable character who comes into this whole situation not knowing anything about what happened in the events of the first game. Because then as a player, you're kind of learning about those events as this new playable character, Saga Anderson's. We knew that Alan was going to be trapped in the dark place, and we knew that we wanted to do a nightmare version of New York for that. And something that's important, though, we feel for the Alan Wake IP is this Pacific Northwest, majestic landscapes, dark, gloomy forests. We really wanted to maintain that in the game, so it made sense for us then to, if Alan's trapped in the dark place and that's his side of experience, that we would have a playable character who the players can use to kind of explore that side of the game world. Part of our development process, we have a phase of the project which is called like proof of concept, which is basically where you're taking this concept which we made and then proving that it's actually something that is cool and that would actually work. We had to do 2 of those because we had to prove Saga's side of the experience with the case board, the mind place, and interacting with characters and how the conversation system works, etc. And then we had to do another one afterwards, which was Wake's side. So like, okay, how does plot board work? How does rewriting reality work? How do the enemies there work? And in terms of like the development, I think the proof of concept that we had done for Saga went very well, actually. Like, I was looking back at them just recently, the videos that we did, and I was like, wow, it's actually very close to what we actually ended up making in the final game. But then when I was looking at the Wake ones, I was like, oh, yeah, that was not quite so close. I think we basically struggled a bit with Wake's side because it's so meta, has so many different layers of reality. It can kind of be an abstract concept, and trying to get developers in the mindset of understanding like how the dark place works, what are the rules that govern the dark place for Wake, and then what does that mean as a developer in terms of like designing those spaces or visualizing those spaces. So it did take us a little while to kind of figure out the dark place, I would say.
Are you okay there, my friend? You look like you've been cooped up in the writer's room for a few too many years.
This is exactly how I feel.
In terms of what order should you play in, there is no right way to play this game, basically. Like, we have designed the game so that you can play through either Saga's story to completion or Wake's side of the story to completion in any order. So if you want to go first with Saga, you can finish that, then switch over to Wake, or vice versa, start as Wake and then go to Saga. Or you can just switch in between missions or whenever you feel that you want to. Our ambitions for live action in this game were quite high. We've had some form of live action in all of our games. There were still images, I think, in Max Payne actually on the TVs rather than actual footage. But in Alan Wake, we then actually moved to doing actual like live action footage that's rendered on TV screens in the game world. And then we did very ambitious stuff for Quantum Break episodes like intersped between the actual game itself. And we've learned a lot doing those games. And in Control, we wanted to explore how we could utilize live action, but rather than just being something that's full screen or something that's on a screen in the game, we wanted to try and find a way to kind of bring it into the game world itself. We were blending live action footage on top of the actual engine. And we thought that those things, for a storytelling tool, they were really effective. So we wanted to take that and kind of amp it up to the next level. We utilize it, for example, live action footage in the actual engine for showcasing who Saga's profiling, getting across their emotional state when Saga's profiling them. We also utilize it, obviously, for Alan Wake himself when he's in writer's room typing, and we kind of showcase that, oh, Saga's picked up a manuscript page. So we kind of show a bit of Alan in live action blended into the game world with the sounds of the typewriter tapping. We just wanted to find interesting ways to use it as a visual storytelling device for those mechanics. So we utilize live action quite heavily in The Dark Place, but it's kind of under the context of Wake in this nightmare reality of The Dark Place, which has many different layers, is basically slipping in and out of different layers of reality inside The Dark Place. You know, it all happens on the controller, so you player has to press a button, we kind of do interesting effects with the camera, we kind of go into it, and Wake from the playable character side is then live action on your game screen, but he's kind of also reacting to the fact that we've just switched medium, so he's almost like, where am I?
Reminded me of The Matrix. I mean, the writer is physically in his writer's room, trapped there, and he projects himself out to this dark dream of New York through the story he is writing. Like astral projection. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We really wanted to kind of build the live action into the actual story itself and kind of utilize it as a way to showcase how like weird and crazy The Dark Place can be. And you know, we had a really great production house in Finland who was basically building those for us. We had like our live action director Anssi Matta, who was kind of working on it with Sam in terms of like with this from the screenplay level and kind of working with the production team. But it happened actually relatively late. Well, I'll have been making on this game for almost 5 years in January, so it's been a long time. But like the live action stuff came online relatively late because you know it's the timelines are much shorter creating live action than is making a game. To be honest, like. I think we started maybe a year ago, and that's also just required because we needed to build what does the writer's room look like in the game, and because we actually, you know, sharing locations between the game and the live action, so we needed to lock all those things down before we could actually move in then to production on the actual live action stuff. So Ilkka Villi, who plays Alan Wake, is very aware of video games, and we've been working with him since the original Alan Wake. When they actually started working with him to begin with, it was like 18 years ago, so like he's been involved in working with us for a long time, so he definitely understands it. And all of the actors that we have been working with, you know, David Harewood, he's a big gamer, he actually really likes Remedy games, so like it was very easy to kind of talk to them on that level, like they kind of understand the contexts. And if there are actors who have not maybe played games, it's like it doesn't really matter in the sense that we try and treat the shoots as they would be if it was an actual shooting of a TV show. So you know, we kind of have all the same kind of crew who can kind of help the actors or whatever. So for them, I think it kind of just comes very naturally for them working in that environment because we try and keep it as close to what they're used to working in as possible. There's one particular sequence that you play for as Alan, which I can't say anything about, but I am definitely excited to see people's reaction to that.
A vision?
One of the first documents I ever wrote for this game was an example of a mission. I just wrote out, it'll be an amusement park of some kind. Obviously, we were like, okay, the amusement parks can be scary. That I think that, you know, you get clowns and stuff like that. We don't want to do that because that's kind of what everybody would do. So we were like, okay, what would be Alan Wake's version of a scary amusement park? And then Sam drinks a lot of coffee, and coffee was a big, you know, we had thermoses in the first game. The coffee does play a role in a like very subliminal, well, actually it's not even that severe. We put thermoses in the game that you save at, so it's like it's kind of in your face. But coffee's kind of a something here. So we were like, okay, what if it was like, I think it was Sam was like, we're not going to do a theme park, we're going to do a coffee one. And we're like, that sounds perfect. That's perfectly what you'd expect from an Alan Wake amusement park. And then we were like, okay, we still want to have, you know, Pacific Northwest still needs to have the forest. So we were like, okay, what if it's one that's set in the middle of a forest and they kind of excavated around it to clear the trees, but it's still in a forest. And then we had artists looking at references for other amusement parks that are kind of in and around like forest areas, and they found some cool stuff. So it's kind of like those two things together, you know, amusement parks in the forest, but also themed around coffee that kind of kickstarted that whole mission. It's one of my favorite missions in the game for sure. Like obviously we're very passionate about the Remedy connected universe. I think that's, as a studio, we're going to keep embracing that and keep moving forward with it. On Alan Wake 2, we started with what is Alan Wake 2? What do we want to get out of Alan Wake 2 as a game? What's the kind of emotional journey we want the characters to go on with the player? And we start from that as the foundation, and then after that point, we then start thinking about nice ways to kind of connect some of the story to previous Remedy games or potential future Remedy games. We're all about that. You know, we have a few different projects on the go inside Remedy, so you know, I think the studio and, you know, team members from other projects who are not necessarily working on Alan Wake 2, like when they see stuff in development about that, oh, that's actually pretty cool, we could utilize that in something in another one of our games. So we're always bouncing around ideas about how we can move the Remedy connected universe forward, but it's a layer on top of us making sure that the base game is good by itself. You don't have to do homework to play these games, basically. I think that's important.
How do you run from an idea?
from a story that lives in your head. I need to escape this nightmare.
I mean, obviously we're working on Control 2 right now, so that's obviously something that we are very excited about inside the studio. Control 1 laid an amazing foundation for us to kind of move that franchise forward. We will be using Alan Wake 2 to do some stuff related to that game as well. Right now, that's our focus. Those are things that we're focusing on. We're almost at the point where kind of, at least right now, and then the current date that I'm doing this interview, that it's out. So, so the Alan Wake 2's out. So, get that one out, and then we'll start looking at what we're going to do next.